She said she didn't want to lose me, but every choice she made risked everything we had. The first time I saw her, it was ordinary in every sense, yet impossible to forget. The coffee shop was quiet, the soft hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine filling the spaces between moments. I sat at a small corner table, nursing a cup of coffee that was already cooling, when she walked in. She moved with that effortless grace older women seem to possess, the kind that comes from experience, confidence, and a quiet acceptance of who you are. She was in her early 40s, I guessed, her hair a soft chestnut with strands catching the light, falling just past her shoulders. Her presence was understated, yet it filled the room, like a song you didn't realize you'd been humming along to. She ordered her drink with a polite, practiced smile, her voice soft but warm. I noticed the faint crease between her brows, a subtle hint of fatigue or worry, and my curiosity nudged me forward. It was in that tiny imperfection, the humanity she carried so naturally, that my attention sharpened. I wanted to know her, and yet, a cautious voice in my mind whispered, "She's out of reach. You shouldn't even try." Our eyes met as she scanned the menu, and she gave me a quick, polite smile. I returned it, not wanting to seem obvious, though something unspoken passed between us in that brief moment, a quiet recognition, like two people noticing the same hidden constellation in the night sky. She turned to wait for her order, and a pen fell from her hand. Reflexively, I bent to pick it up, extending it toward her. "Here," I said, holding it out. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it. The contact was fleeting, accidental, yet it sent a warmth up my arm I hadn't expected. She smiled again, a little softer this time, and muttered a quiet, "Thank you?" Just a word, yet it carried weight, a subtle acknowledgement of our tiny, shared connection. I wanted to speak more, to break the barrier that polite society had erected between us, but I hesitated. There was something about her, not just the age difference, but the quiet authority in her presence, the gentle vulnerability beneath it, that made me pause. And yet, even in hesitation, the pull was undeniable. I watched her find a seat across the room. Every small movement, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the delicate sip of her drink, the way her eyes lingered on the pages of a book, all of it made the ordinary feel charged. I realized that sometimes, the most ordinary moments carried the most extraordinary weight. By the time I left, my coffee long forgotten, her image was imprinted in my mind. Not in a fleeting crush way, but as someone I couldn't stop thinking about, the start of something fragile, unspoken, and utterly compelling. Something told me this wasn't just a random encounter. Something told me that if I wanted to know her, I'd have to navigate more than just chance. And somehow, the thought excited me more than it scared me. A week had passed since that brief encounter in the coffee shop, yet her image lingered in my mind as if etched there by quiet insistence. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon, yet fate, or whatever small mischief the universe enjoys, intervened. I was browsing the local bookstore, absent-mindedly flipping through a section on photography, when I saw her again. She was leaning over a table stacked with books, fingers tracing the spines as if memorizing them, her brows drawn in concentration. In that moment, she looked both composed and achingly human, a mix of grace and quiet vulnerability that tugged at something inside me. Our eyes met as I reached for a book on the same shelf, and there it was again, that subtle recognition, that unspoken acknowledgement that this meeting was more than coincidence. This time we spoke. It was casual at first, a comment about the book she was holding, a shared smile, laughter that felt lighter than expected. But with each word, the distance between us shrank. I noticed the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the way her voice carried a quiet warmth, and the subtle way her hand brushed against mine as we exchanged books. It was accidental, fleeting, yet it left a spark, a gentle charge that lingered long after the moment passed. We moved to the cafe corner inside the bookstore, seated at a small table tucked beneath the soft glow of a reading lamp. Conversation flowed, revealing little details, favorite authors, childhood memories, the small frustrations of adult life. There was an ease to it, a rare kind of comfort that made my chest tighten with longing. Her presence felt like a quiet revelation, like discovering a melody you'd always known but never truly heard. Yet beneath the comfort, there was tension, unspoken and deliberate. Every lingering glance, every pause before speaking, carried weight. I was drawn to her, undeniably, but aware of the gap between us, not just in age, but in experience, in the lives we had led. And I sensed she felt it too. She smiled at my jokes, yet there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, as if measuring the consequences of letting herself feel too much. As the afternoon waned, I found myself reluctant to leave, though my mind raced with caution. The age difference, the unspoken rules, the fear of misreading signals, it all crowded my thoughts. And yet, when she stood to leave, her eyes met mine once more, holding a moment longer than necessary. My heart beat a little faster. I wanted to say more, to ask her to linger, to find another excuse to extend this fragile connection, but I held back. We parted with a quiet, polite farewell, yet in that goodbye was the promise of more. Something had shifted between us, subtle, fragile, and undeniable. I walked away aware that this was no longer a simple curiosity or fleeting fascination. This was the beginning of something deeper, something that neither of us could ignore. And even as I stepped into the fading sunlight, I knew I would think of her again, long after the bookstore's doors had closed behind her. It had been weeks since our unplanned encounter at the bookstore, yet the memory of her lingered like a quiet melody I couldn't forget. Then, by what felt like another twist of fate, our paths crossed again, this time at a small neighborhood park, the kind with winding paths and benches tucked beneath overhanging trees. I had been jogging, headphones in, lost in rhythm and thought, when I saw her sitting on a bench, sketchbook balanced on her lap. The sunlight caught her hair, turning it to gold brown in places, and I felt that same pull I'd noticed the first time, a mixture of fascination, hesitation, and longing. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us. "Hey," I said, voice just a little breathless from the jog, but warm. "Hey," she replied, and the corners of her mouth lifted in that soft, knowing smile I'd come to recognize. We fell into conversation effortlessly, though now there was something different. The air between us carried a subtle weight, a tension unspoken but felt. She mentioned her sketching, her voice carrying an unusual softness, almost confessional. I commented on a page she was drawing, delicate lines capturing the light through the trees, and she glanced at me, a flicker of something passing through her eyes, amusement, curiosity, and something deeper, something unspoken. At one point she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing her neck. My gaze lingered, though I tried not to let it show. The moment was charged, not with anything overt, but with that quiet, magnetic pull that made proximity feel electric. And then, almost without thinking, she admitted, I enjoy your company more than I probably should." Her words landed softly but firmly, like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples across my mind. My chest tightened. I wanted to respond, to confess that I felt the same, but the right words eluded me. Instead, I smiled, letting my hand brush over the edge of her sketchbook as if by accident. It lingered, a subtle, deliberate touch, and I felt her pulse shift slightly beneath my fingers. We continued to walk along the path, side by side, not touching yet, but the space between us felt smaller than ever. Every pause in conversation, every shared glance, held meaning. The rustle of leaves, the warmth of the afternoon sun, the occasional distant laughter of children, all of it framed our quiet intimacy, heightening it without a single word. I realized then that desire was not always loud or urgent. Sometimes it was in the pauses, the lingering looks, the nearly accidental touches that left your heart racing. She felt the same, I could tell, and yet neither of us crossed the invisible line. There was caution, yes, and respect, but also undeniable tension, a longing that neither dared fully name. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the path, we finally parted. A soft goodbye, a subtle smile, and that lingering gaze, an unspoken promise that this story was only beginning. I walked away feeling the weight of what was stirring between us, knowing that the slow, careful dance of our hearts had just taken its first meaningful step, The connection between us had grown quietly, almost imperceptibly, like roots intertwining beneath the surface. It wasn't just attraction anymore, it was trust, curiosity, and an unspoken need to understand each other. That afternoon, she invited me to her apartment under the pretense of helping her rearrange a small collection of books and photographs. I knew it was ordinary on the surface, but I felt the weight of anticipation as I approached her door. She opened it with that same warm, slightly hesitant smile that had lingered in my mind for weeks. Her apartment was a reflection of her, elegant yet lived in, every corner revealing layers of personality, framed sketches, soft blankets draped over a sofa, the faint scent of jasmine in the air. She gestured for me to sit, and as I did, I noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way she fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. Something was unspoken, and I waited, sensing it was an invitation to listen, to witness. "I've been dealing with some things," she began, her voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. "Stuff from the past. Things I'm not sure how to talk about." I nodded, keeping my tone gentle. "You can tell me," I said, though even the words felt inadequate. And she did. She spoke of a long-term relationship that ended painfully, of regrets that lingered like shadows, of moments when she questioned herself and her choices. Her vulnerability wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, honest, and profoundly human. Every word, every pause drew me closer, made me want to offer comfort without intruding. At one point she paused, a trembling in her hands, and I instinctively reached out, placing my hand over hers. It was deliberate yet gentle, a grounding touch that conveyed more than words ever could. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes, an acknowledgement that she could let down her guard, even for a moment. The proximity of our hands, the warmth of her skin against mine, the slight brush of her wrist, it all spoke louder than anything else in the room. We sat in silence for a while, sharing the quiet together. Her head tilted slightly toward me, as if drawn to the reassurance I offered. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make her pain lighter, but I realized the most important thing was simply being there, present, allowing her to feel safe. That, in itself, was a form of intimacy. By the time she leaned back, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips, I felt a shift, a subtle acknowledgement of trust, of connection, of the delicate, unspoken bond forming between us. The emotional tension was palpable, but it was no longer just curiosity or attraction, it was empathy, care, and the quiet understanding that we mattered to each other in ways that were slowly, beautifully unfolding. As I left that day, the city bathed in late afternoon light, I realized something crucial. Desire was no longer just about longing or fascination. It was about the spaces between words, the comfort in shared silences, the gravity of vulnerability. And for the first time, I knew that whatever this was, it was real, it was deep, and it was worth navigating, carefully, patiently, together. The days that followed her quiet confession lingered in my mind like a delicate, persistent echo. Our interactions had always been measured, restrained, yet I could feel the tension between us growing, subtle but undeniable. That evening, the moment came, unplanned, sudden, and impossible to ignore. It had started as a casual walk through the city after a shared dinner. The streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of street lamps and the occasional neon sign flickering in the distance. Rain had started lightly, drizzling in silvery threads across the pavement, and she had reached for the umbrella she had thoughtfully brought along. I noticed how the dim light caught the rain on her hair, turning each strand into a halo of soft warmth. We walked close under the umbrella, the confined space forcing our shoulders to brush, a subtle contact that neither of us could ignore. Her hand occasionally nudged mine as she adjusted the umbrella, and I felt the familiar warmth ignite along my arm. Each accidental touch, each shared glance, carried a weight far greater than the simplicity of the gesture. There was a pause, a silence filled with more than just the quiet patter of rain. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes deep, searching, and I felt the pull stronger than ever. For a moment, time seemed suspended, the city faded into a blur, and it was just her and me, standing close enough to feel the rhythm of each other's breaths. I shouldn't, She whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. There was hesitation in her voice, a mixture of fear and longing, and I understood entirely. Neither of us wanted to cross boundaries that could unravel everything we had built. Yet the temptation, the magnetic pull between us, was impossible to deny. My hand hovered uncertain over the small of her back as we passed the shop window. Her reflection caught my eye, the softness in her expression, the slight tremor in her lips, and I realized she was feeling the same tension, the same desire. I withdrew instinctively, but our shoulders remained in contact, a small, lingering intimacy that spoke volumes. We continued walking, each step measured, each glance loaded with unspoken meaning. The umbrella could only do so much to separate us. Proximity had become its own language. I felt my heart racing, aware of the danger of acting too quickly, yet simultaneously aware that the pull was mutual, that something was building between us that neither of us could ignore. By the time we reached her door, the rain had slowed, but the air between us was charged, electric. Our eyes met once more, holding a silent conversation filled with questions neither of us dared speak aloud. She smiled faintly, almost apologetically, and I knew that this was a moment that would linger, a reminder of what was possible, what was forbidden, and how much we both wanted more than we were willing to admit. As I stepped away, the quiet thrill of temptation remained, a soft ache that promised both risk and reward. And I realized that the slow, careful dance between us had just become infinitely more complicated, yet more irresistible than ever. The tension that had been quietly simmering between us finally reached its tipping point. We met that evening at her apartment, a neutral space where walls, familiar furniture, and soft lighting gave us permission to be ourselves, or at least, to attempt it. The city outside was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, while inside, a small lamp cast gentle shadows across her living room. She was already there when I arrived, seated on the sofa with a book in her hands. But the book was a prop, a shield, and I knew it. Her eyes lifted when I entered, warm yet cautious, and for a moment either of us spoke. We stood in silence, feeling the weight of unspoken words, the pull of emotions that had been building for weeks. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't want to lose you," she said, and those words hung in the air like fragile glass. They were both a confession and a plea, filled with vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I took a step closer, careful not to invade her space, letting my presence offer reassurance rather than pressure. "Then why risk everything?" I asked, my voice equally soft but edged with concern. The question wasn't just about boundaries or propriety. It was about the fragility of what we built, the potential heartbreak that loomed if we acted impulsively. Her eyes shimmered, caught between desire and restraint. I noticed the small gestures, the way her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve, the slight tilt of her head, the way her gaze flickered to my lips and then quickly away. Each movement was an unspoken conversation, a dance of attraction and caution that spoke louder than words ever could. We talked then, really talked, about fears, about past mistakes, about the delicate line between longing and prudence. She admitted the pull she felt, the moments when she wanted to reach for me but held back. I confessed the same, sharing my hesitation, my fear of misstepping, of hurting her or losing the connection we had nurtured so carefully. Throughout the conversation, our proximity shifted naturally. At one point, her hand hovered near mine, and I reached out gently, letting our fingers brush together. It was a subtle, charged touch, a silent acknowledgement that we were both drawn to each other, that the tension wasn't just internal, it existed in the space between us. The warmth of her skin, the small pulse beneath my fingertips, and the weight of her gaze made my chest ache with a mix of longing and worry. By the end of the night, there was clarity. We weren't acting impulsively, and yet we weren't ignoring the connection that had grown between us. There was trust, understanding, and a profound awareness that our feelings were real and undeniable. We parted that evening with a lingering hug, slow, deliberate, comforting, our faces close enough to feel the warmth of each other's breath, our hands entwined just enough to hold on to what had been confessed. And as I stepped out into the quiet night, the words lingered in my mind, heavy with meaning, The risk, the desire, the unspoken promise that what we shared was too significant to ignore, even if it demanded patience. The weeks after our honest conversation were filled with a quiet, tentative rhythm. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just small moments, each carefully measured, each carrying meaning beyond words. We were learning to navigate the fragile balance between desire and caution, between longing and respect, and in that process, our connection deepened in ways neither of us had expected. It began with simple routines, shared coffees on lazy Sunday mornings, walks through the city at dusk, moments when our hands would brush as we passed books or adjusted our jackets. Each touch was a gentle acknowledgement of what had grown between us, a warmth that lingered long after we separated, a quiet reassurance that we were both here, both willing to explore this slowly, deliberately. One evening, we found ourselves on the small balcony of her apartment, the city lights twinkling like distant stars below. A soft breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below. She leaned slightly against the railing, her eyes reflecting the golden glow of the street lamps. I stood beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder, yet careful to respect the invisible boundary we had agreed upon. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said softly, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. Her voice carried a mix of vulnerability and wonder, the kind of honesty that made my chest tighten. I turned to her, letting my gaze linger. "Me neither," I admitted. "And yet, here we are." For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, letting the unspoken emotions fill the space between us. Then, slowly, she reached out, and our hands met, fingers intertwining with ease, a silent affirmation of everything we had felt but hadn't yet spoken aloud. The simple touch was electrifying yet comforting, a balance of desire and trust. We didn't need words. The warmth of her hand in mine, the slight press of her shoulder against mine, the soft brush of her hair as she leaned closer, all of it conveyed what our voices could not. The tension of the past weeks, the careful restraint, the quiet longing, dissolved into something steady, real, and deeply satisfying. Finally she spoke again, her voice a whisper. "I'm glad we didn't rush. That we took our time." I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. Every moment brought us here. And this feels right. As the city hummed softly below, we stood side by side, hands clasped, content in the quiet intimacy we had nurtured. There was no need for dramatic gestures or declarations. The emotional connection, the shared understanding, and the trust we had built were enough. We had navigated the tension, the temptation, the fears, and emerged with a bond that felt profound, steady, and real. In that moment, I realized that romance wasn't always about fireworks or urgency. Sometimes, it was about patience, mutual respect, and the small, tender touches that spoke louder than words ever could. And as we lingered there together, bathed in soft light and gentle warmth, I knew this was just the beginning of something enduring, slow, deliberate, and entirely ours.